Hello and welcome to Sit and See. I'm Dr. Jared Jones. Research specialties, ancient systems of meditation, the cognitive science of meditation, Buddhist philosophy, and the philosophy of science. We are gathered here today once again to train in meditation together. And we're going to jump straight into standing practice. So if you're not into standing meditation practice, that's too bad. Joking aside, standing meditation practice is incredibly important. If you'd like to be able to take the results that you're getting on the cushion off the cushion one day, if you'd like to be able to train in meditation in different circumstances beyond when you're sitting down or laying down, you need to actually train yourself under increasing demand. So, amongst the lightest circumstances of demand is simply trying to meditate while standing up. Yeah. So, some of you have done this practice with me before. If you are unfamiliar with standing practice, I will teach you a little bit about it today. If you have any questions, we'll hang out for just a minute while I'm waiting to get started. We have Ty, we have Luck. Yeah, I saw your comment, Luck. I tend to do my live stream for Q&A on the fly. I don't have it on a set schedule at the moment. I just try to stagger it so that people in different time zones will have access to get some Q&A time in. If there's something that's on your mind, you can always reach out to me on Discord. You can reach out to me in the comment section of any of the videos or the live streams here. Happy to answer questions as we go along. Or for those of you who don't know me, I do a fair amount of phone calls with people, hop on video, chat face to face about your practice. So if that's something that you're interested in, again, I do all of that stuff for free. So because of the generous members of the community allowing me to do all of this, people who are signed up for the 5 Foundations course, which I have linked there, people that are signed up for 18 Lohan, or people that are just sending donations through. Thankfully, uh, I still need a little bit more to sort of get what we need for this month, but thankfully, the last few months have been doable. And I've been able to upgrade the whole setup so that I can do this full time with you guys now. Um, if you want to talk on the phone, just reach out to me on Discord. We'll set up a time and we can actually talk face to face. Yeah, Ty, we've got pretty close to 3,000 subscribers on the channel now. So pretty soon I can sell frozen pizzas or whatever before every live stream. Okay. Well, I'm looking like this is going to be it for today. So let's go over the basics of standing practice. And then what I plan to do with you today is body scanning, and we'll do 2 different standing poses from the 18 Lohan set. Ah, let's see. Let's see. Data. I'm not sure what that is. My apologies. You'll have to clarify that, but let's jump into some practice. Maybe we'll have time afterwards. Okay. I went blackberry picking with my wife today, and I wore short sleeves, and I definitely reached through a whole bunch of stinging nettle. So it'll be an extra mental workout for me today. Right. So, standing practice, what we plan to do today is quite simple. We're going to do a body scan in a couple of different standing positions that are standing positions you would get in the Lohan material. They're very basic. You find them all over the place. These are very, very good for getting the body set up well for your seated practice. They have a number of other benefits as well. I don't need to cover those today. But in addition to this, I'm going to teach you how to do 5 points meditation. 5 points meditation is a bridging technique that you can build off of your tactile awareness, your awareness of your body, into a type of meditative technique or technology, let's say, that you can actually take into a moving position. So we're going to work on both of those techniques today, just a scan in the standing position and then 5 points meditation in the standing position. And we might do a little bit of walking depending upon how things are going. Okay. So in terms of the standing posture itself, you want your feet to be even and facing forward. You don't want your feet to be facing out or facing in. They should be straight forward. If you're looking at the inside of your feet, they'll be lined up as if they're on train tracks, right? So they'll be lined up like this. And you want them between hip distance, which would be about here, and shoulder distance, which would be about here. So as for me, I'm somewhere in the middle. I think I'm going to make mine a little wider today. Now, the next portion, once you have the feet on the ground, is you want to put the pressure behind the front of the ball of the foot or in front of the heel. So at the front part of the heel or at the back part of the ball of the foot is where you get maximum sort of engagement with both the bones of the body and the connective tissue and muscles of the body. So if you just do a quick experiment and keep your hands at your sides so that you can really feel what's happening and just lean forward as far as you can, you'll find that as you lean forward, more and more muscle groups have to fire in your back, in your legs, in your calves, and so forth to hold you up, right? So as you rock forward, there's a tendency to engage more of the muscular system of the body. Likewise, if you go like this and you start leaning backwards, you'll find that you end up on your bones. And as you lean backwards, there's not much to contract in the front to hold you up. You can try to use your belly or whatever, but pretty quickly you're falling backwards because you're basically just standing on the bones and there's not much to stop you from falling backwards unless you arch your back or something, right? So, in order to engage both the bones and the muscular system and the connective tissue all as one unit, because we're trying to work out the whole unit to make it better for sitting, and we want a posture that in the beginning it won't be super comfortable, but in the long run we want something comfortable for sitting. Bend the knees slightly until the weight is somewhere between the front of the heel and the back of the ball of the foot. Okay? Next, your hips. I'm going to exaggerate bad posture. So you don't want your hips sticking out like this, which a lot of people do. You want to take your hips and bring them underneath your body, but you also don't want to be like this, where your hips are now pointing, right? Which is also awkward and incorrect. One way of thinking about it is you can imagine that there's a very heavy weight pulling down from your perineum to between your feet. And that tends to pull the hips into the right position, right? If my hips were here and there was a heavy weight pulling from the perineum, that would pull me upright like this, right? If my hips were here, same thing, it would pull my body back down to this position if there was a heavy weight right in the middle. So bend the knees, get the hips underneath you, feel your lower back, put a hand on the lower back. Your lower back should still have a slight arch. It shouldn't be flexed out like this, which some people do if they've trained in internal arch. That'll screw up your back. You don't want to be like this unless you're about to exert power in some direction. You actually want the natural position of the spine to be maintained but slightly elongated. So slightly elongated, you just relax those muscles there, but you still have an arch. Chest is the next piece. With your chest, just slightly hard to show, I'll exaggerate it. You just slightly drop it down, right? So if my chest was unnaturally held here, you slightly drop it down. You don't want to do this, where your shoulders roll forward and you have no chest. But if you slightly relax the chest, you'll feel, even on the camera, if you look, watch my back. If I release the chest, see how my back actually goes up? So when you release the front of the chest, actually what you're doing is allowing the back of the spine to open slightly. So now we've elongated the whole spine. Same thing you have to do if you're going to sit for a long time. Okay. Next is the neck and shoulders area. So with the shoulders, mm, shoulders are quite difficult to get to behave properly because we put a lot of our anxiety in our shoulders and a number of other things. But if you just raise your shoulders, I'll turn sideways. If you raise your shoulders not just up, which would be here, but back and up, you'll feel how when you do that, the back of your neck gets tense. The reason for this is that there are muscles running from the top of the shoulders onto the back of the neck. And this is quite often what feels tense when your neck feels tense. Unless you have really bad neck posture from looking at your phone, it's probably your shoulder muscles at the top of the shoulders actually making the neck feel tense. So tense those muscles not as hard as you can, but maybe 90%, and then relax. And one more time, and then relax. Right? So with that, you should feel like the neck is a little bit looser because you grabbed the muscles that normally feel tense and you told them to relax. All right. Likewise, quite a few people have tension here, which is this motion, pulling forward, right? So quite a few people do this because they're hiding. They're trying to cover up stuff in the front of the body where it's squishy and vulnerable because everyone has anxiety and or they're used to looking at their phone and being on their computer. So sometimes I joke with my wife, it's like a pterodactyl, or like a T-Rex. Everyone's doing this all the time. So same thing. If you take your shoulders and roll them forward and just tighten them here, forward and slightly up, and then release them down, forward and slightly up, and release them down, then you might feel that some of this tension on the side of the neck here releases a bit. Okay? So this is the best I can do for getting your shoulders in shape. There's way more work probably that most people need to do on the shoulders and neck to make them feel really comfortable, but it's not that kind of class. Next, top of the neck. So if you feel the back of your head, you'll feel that there's a bump. There's a big ridge there on the sort of about the middle of what you think is your head. That's actually where your vertebra connect into your skull. So if you feel down, you'll feel that the vertebra actually begins right below that big bump. So that's where the joint is, where your neck actually connects into the skull. So when you see in a bunch of meditation texts where they say drop the chin, watch my neck. This is a big mistake. A lot of people do this, like a military person. That'll degrade your neck vertebra, and by the time you hit 30 years old, you'll have neck problems and it'll make it harder to sit. So instead of doing that, just on from that joint at the top, just lower that joint. You see how the rest of my neck stays the same? It's just that top joint. Is this making sense? So now, from that top joint, feel the very top of your head, not in the middle, not here in the middle, but the middle of the back third. So from the middle of the back third, as if something was grabbing you sort of by the hair, your chin falls down, right? Or you can think that from the back of the skull, from that joint, you just use that joint and put the head down. And then everything else falls away from that point to in between the 2 feet. You with me? So everything else in your body falls away from here through the center of the body, through the perineum to between, so that the weight is basically hitting between the feet. But you don't want to do this with your knees. The knees should stay out, right? And in effect, then with your knees bent and the feet in the right position, the weight lands somewhere between front of the ball, back of the heel. And you should already feel pretty heavy. The body should now start to feel pretty heavy. So initially, this will make your feet uncomfortable, but in the long run, This will make your body very comfortable for sitting and standing because we're working on the spine and the ability of the spine to hold up your body without having to use very much effort. Finally, we arrive at the arms. And for today, we're going to do it slightly differently than I normally teach. Normally, I teach touch the thigh. We're going to do it Lohan style from a Qigong set called Heavy Hands. So you're just going to let the arms float a little bit in front of the body and a bit further out. So the elbows are about here, which is about where they would be if you were in a meditation posture. You see? So from here, you let the arms hang down and you don't do anything with the hands in this particular standing position. You just let the hands be as they are. So now from here, we're going to start the body scan and we're going to go down the body for this. So starting from the top of the skull, put the mind into that area that's on the back third of the middle part of the back of the skull. The middle part of the back third of the top of the skull, rather. And release anything that doesn't need to be tense. And then, as if there's a ring that's making its way down your body, the forehead, the sides of the head, the back of the head, a ring of tissue surrounding the upper part of the skull. Just release any tension. First, place the mind in that ring with great focus, and then any bit of tension that doesn't need to be there, release it down to the feet. Next, a ring of tissue, including the ears, the eyes, nose, and the very upper part of the vertebra. And release. Next ring of tissue is the middle part of the neck, chin, tongue, upper part of the throat. Release. Now the lower third of the neck. Release. Into both shoulders. In particular, put a little bit of extra attention on the back of the shoulders and the top of the shoulders and release. Now the bicep region. Release. Elbow region. Release. Forearms. Release. Wrists. Release. Palms and the back of your hands. Release. Fingers. Release. Now the barrel of the chest. Release. The diaphragm region. Release. The waist region. Release. Front and back of the pelvis. Release. Into the hip joints on both sides. Release. Thighs. Release. Knees. Release. Calves. Release. Ankles. Release. Even though most of your weight is probably towards the front of your heels, spread your awareness out to the back of your heel, the big toe, and the little toe on both feet. And release. Now take the arms, don't shake them out, and don't shake out the legs. And as if you're hugging a barrel. Also, you'll probably find that whereas with this posture, the weight ends up being more on the heels. As the hands come forward, if you watch the top of my head, also my weight, my center of gravity shifts forward, you see? So your weight will probably end up more towards the front, the back of the balls of the feet. So one more time. From the top of the skull, and release. Forehead, sides of the head, back of the skull, release. Eyes, ears, nose, upper third of the neck, release. Mouth, chin, tongue, upper throat, middle third of the neck, release. Lower third of the neck, release. The shoulders with special emphasis on the back of the shoulders and the tops of the shoulders, release. Biceps, release. elbows, release, forearms, release, wrists, release, palms and the back of the hands, release, fingers, release. Now the arms, shoulders, etc., feet may be a little bit angry. Leave them as they are. Put the mind in the chest. Release. Diaphragm region. Release. Waist region. Release. Pelvis, front and back. Release. The hip joints on both sides. Release. Upper thighs. Release. Lower thighs. Release. Knees. Release. Calves. Release. Ankles. Release. And the three corners of the foot, back of the heel, big toe, little toe. Release. Now, with some grace, lower your arms and just let them hang naturally. If your feet are bothering you, then just walk slowly a few steps. Some of the tingling or the burning in the feet will go away, but don't shake out your legs or anything. So even just a little bit of movement like that should make them feel, if not normal, mostly normal. Now, 5 points meditation. So 5 points differs from what we were just doing, that which is Neigong, internal skill, right? Neigong is placing the mind somewhere inside the system or inside the body, and then requesting that that part of the body actually do something that you've decided you'd like it to do, like release extra muscular tension. So, for those of you who have done body scanning with me before, you'll notice that we've added on this new skill, right? So Neigong, internal skill, includes stuff like this, where the shoulder is not quite right, you're holding it somewhere, and you release the tension that doesn't need to be there. Shoulder doesn't need to be like that. Boom, right? Internal skill. Very helpful for meditation if you can use that skill without leaving a state of concentration. If you're sitting for a long time and the body becomes uncomfortable, which it will, this is one of the skill sets that's really helpful. So this comes over from 18 Lohan practice. You can find more about that down below. Um, but in terms of 5 foundation practice, the body scanning portion, just placing the awareness in the tissue, is body scanning. The next technique, 5 points, is learning how to place your awareness in the 5 points that are the furthest away from each other in the body, roughly speaking, so that you can learn eventually how to spread your awareness through the whole body. So, the first point is the back third in the middle of your skull. So, this region sort of here, not here in the middle, but the back third middle. So, place your awareness in that point first. So, once you have some portion of your awareness in that point, sort of grab onto that awareness, if you will, keeping it there and stretch it down, not by moving your arms and such, that's just to demonstrate. Stretch it down until it hits your hands. And you may have some awareness of what's in between, but the most important thing is that you're getting top of the head and the hands. Don't lose the top of the head. Next, without losing the top of the head or the hands, bring most of your awareness back to the top of the head. Mentally grab onto it and stretch it back down again to the feet until you hit the extremities in the feet, the heel, big toe, little toe. Stretching the awareness out now. Top of the head, both hands, both feet, 5 points. Refresh your awareness. Back of the skull, both hands, both feet, 5 points. Hold. Okay, very briefly, just walk very slowly. And if you find that as you're walking back and forth, that, oh, I lost my right hand, then stop, reestablish, top of the head, both hands, both feet, start walking again. And if you need to go very, very, very slow, that's fine. The key is that you maintain the same quality of awareness you had while you were standing. And you may need to walk very slow. Okay. Since I didn't intend for us to do a lot of walking practice, we shall call it a day in terms of practice there. Okay, my friends. Let's see. We had a couple of questions. Mm, Let's see. If there are questions about today's practice or about Five Foundations practice stuff that we're doing in general, just pop it into the chat. We'll do a few minutes of questions here. So, to what extent does toroidal toroidal flow of the energy reflect your meditation terrain? Does it relate to your Qigong world? Parallel to an electromagnetic field, the physical shell of the energy field. I'm still not quite sure what you mean. I mean, there's some interesting stuff having to do with environmental, how to say, if you get further down the path of training in Neigong, Qigong stuff, there's all sorts of interesting stuff related to the environment and some other things. If you're into that kind of thing, if you're not into that kind of thing, don't worry about it. Uh, and I would actually encourage people to start the journey into those things with a relatively skeptical mind. Not that you should say, "Oh, it's all nonsense," but you should say, "Let me see if there's anything to this or not." Because if you do it like that, then if you have good teachers and blah blah blah, stuff will happen. And then you'll know from your experience, "Oh yeah, I did this thing. They said it would be like this. It actually is like that." And it's a much more powerful experience than just taking it on the nose, taking it on faith. Uh, so not quite sure how to answer that question exactly, but it's definitely true. It's definitely true that if you're training in one space like this here, if you're training in one space regularly, you'll find that that space tends to support your practice. that psychologically that space starts to support what it is that you're doing. Is there for lack of a better term, a qigong sort of subtle physical substance aspect of that? Probably. How important is it to you in the beginning? Mm, not super important. I mean, unless you could have like quite a capable holy being come and bless the area you're doing your practice or something in. And again, whether or not that's simply a psychological effect or it's more than that, to a degree isn't the point. You know, these systems developed in ways that were somatic. They were phenomenological. People did things, and they found out that those things had actual effects. You know, they turned up and did stuff, and it turned. You know, I bet you, I would bet you that the first meditators who went to a cave, for example, where somebody else had spent years doing practice and actually gained attainment in those places, I would bet you that they were surprised that that place had sort of a vibe, you know, had a feeling. Uh, It's a surprising thing that if you go to a place where someone's done a huge amount of practice, that simply being in that location changes your awareness. It changes your experience of things and it makes it easier to do your practice. Your mind gets more calm just because you're there. And exactly why that happens, in a sense, isn't the point. You know, it happens. Is it placebo? Is it psychology? Is it this? Is it that? Maybe not so important because the effect is real. So they say it in a bunch of the classics that if you want to train in concentration, for example, go train somewhere that that someone else is like if you want to do full on retreat, you know, you wanted to do 4 months or 6 months of retreat and attain jhana for the first time, like full on. Okay, fine. One of the recommendations is beyond a whole bunch of other things like having a supportive community and your teacher on standby and the resources you need and it's relatively clean and you have access to food and water and all of these other things. The one piece of advice is go do practice somewhere that somebody already attained realization because it helps. So, you know, this is very much baked into the early sources in terms of how to train in meditation. So this is something that for those of you who are sort of interested in what the benefit might be, for example, to turning up somewhere, you know, like why would you actually turn up somewhere to do retreat or be in the presence of a great master or travel and spend a whole bunch of money to sit in the presence of somebody and do the same practices you could do at home? This would be the argument as to why. If you're sitting around with a bunch of other people who are trying to do the same practice and you're there with somebody who's accomplished in the practice, it changes your practice. Yeah, I'm glad you say that, Ty, because I mean, I've had the same experience. Once again, despite myself, despite my skepticism, despite all of these things, I've turned up places and been blown away by how different the environment is when a great being is in the environment. You know, when I visited Lama Zopa's home in California, for example, it wait because he was there, it was like walking into pea soup, you know? Like the it was in the air. His he modulated the entire environment and you couldn't think the way you normally would. Your emotions were different. Your body felt different. It really is a remarkable thing. Anyways, so this would be the reason uh to turn up in person to do stuff beyond the obvious, right? And whether or not that's all psychological or this or that, again, is sort of not the point. We're human beings, and this is one of the things that happens to us when we're around other people who are quite capable. So maybe that's all it is. I don't personally think that's all it is because of other experiences that I've had, but uh, yeah. That being said, as you guys know, I train most people to do retreat at home because I think it's good for you to develop the ability in the midst of your ordinary environment, distraction, this and that going on, having to negotiate with the people you live with to figure out, well, how do I do more serious practice without really interrupting their lives too much and this and that. All of those negotiations and figuring out how to deal with your situation so that you can sit down and do 8 hours of practice a day. When you get done with that, you're going to be so much better at practicing in your home environment than you were before you started. Even if you only do that for 3 days or 5 days, you will be totally different in your own environment because you did that. And there's huge benefits to that. That being said, I also cannot understate the importance of, for those of you who don't have a spiritual community, at least from time to time, travel somewhere and spend some time with great beings so you can see for yourself. Uh, it's different when you're around great practitioners. Okay, data expands the question. If you don't experience meditation, qigong, neigong as a field, like a self-expanding, contracting fountain field, how would you explain your experience of the field? Okay. So if all of this sounds too weird for the most of you, that's fine. Just sort of hit pause and come back in 5 minutes, okay? So I've explained he lived in Santa Cruz, Luck. Lama Zopa lived in Santa Cruz. So I've explained on a number of occasions, I'm a PhD academic, been around a lot of skeptical academic people who don't believe in anything as far as I can tell. Been trained in all of the tools that prepare you to not be taken in or be gullible or these sorts of things. And I've approached my training in internal stuff with that, whether I like it or not, operating in the back of my head somewhere, even in the midst of training with actual lineages and real people and accomplished people according to their lineages. Uh, that being said, I'm not a great being. I'm not a great practitioner. I'm okay. I'm doing all right. I've done some retreat, I've done some study, I've made some progress. Having said this, when I've done practices related to Qigong, Neigong, for those of you who don't know what those practices are, the Chinese system divides the physical unit, let's say, into three parts. The first part is called, and if any of my students who speak Chinese turn up, my deep apologies for not knowing how to do the diacritics in Chinese. It's been many years since I studied Cantonese. So the first one is Jing, which means the physical body. But there are also, within the physical body, there are things like hormones and substances, like actual physical substances. So these sorts of substances, at a physical level, there are types of practice you can do to literally change the hormonal balance in your body and things like this. One of my teachers said that there's a set of practices that are intended for people who are about to go to war, for example. And he's done those practices and been around when they were doing studies on those practices. And the guys who were doing the men who were doing those practices for short periods of time, because of the way they're squeezing your organs and whatever, they literally cause you to produce huge amounts of extra testosterone, which gives you a ton of drive, a ton of aggression, a ton of energy. And that's great if you're going to be in battle, right? It's fantastic. So there are practices that operate on the level of the actual physical unit, and they change the way that your body is set up on a biological level. Has all of that been verified scientifically? Definitely not. Has some of it been looked at scientifically, and have we found interesting stuff? Yeah, I think so. I think some of it. Uh, when you start looking at systems like this, you will find that there's a huge array of different stuff. and there are lots of claims being made, and there's no good way to verify all of those claims. But if you're involved in the training of those things and you have a specific issue or a specific thing you're dealing with and you want to try to adjust it and you try various types of practice, you'll find that the ones that are designed to fix those issues, if you go through a few of them, usually you find one that actually really does address what it is you're dealing with in terms of physical stuff. It was quite interesting. Again, it's not 100%, but neither is modern medicine. Is it as reliable as modern medicine? Probably not, but still, there's some interesting stuff there that's worth looking at and trying out. So this is at the level of the body, making the body strong, making the connective tissue strong, making the blood flow well, learning how to feel your organs and being able to massage your individual organs and do things with each of the major organ systems so that they function even better than normal, in theory, right? So that's the Jing level. The next level is the Qi level, and Qi has a number of different meanings. It can literally mean uh, blood. It can mean your actual blood, or it can mean your actual breath. It can also mean long, complex relationships between two things that are physical. So, for example, I've used this on this stream before. If you learn how to release through Neigong or through Neigong, right, like we were doing with standing practice, you're actually learning how to release. See this? To release the weight down. And if you can create a structure through which that wave that goes down can bounce back up, watch my arm. See how that wave ends up flicking back out through the arm? You see it? Then you can learn to create waves of pressure that go through the structure you've created in the body to create force. And those forces are called jin. In the martial sense, you would say fa jin, right? So it's a refined type of martial force. So instead of using the big muscle groups to create the force, you use these long connections running through the body to create physical forces. That's part of why the internal arts done at a high level look so weird, because the body's not operating the way it normally would. Is that going to work in an MMA setting? Probably for most people not, because they're not training to fight. I wouldn't want to step into an MMA setting with those skills. I'd want to train in some other stuff, but they are real things and you can learn to do them, and they work on people that aren't complying. You just have to train really hard to make them work in a real fight. Okay, so those jins are also considered a type of chi, right? These incredibly complex connections inside the body where you're building up skills and being able to do stuff that looks really weird from the outside. Then there's also stuff that basically, from what we've seen, I put up a study a while back from 2004. It was a meta study. I put it up somewhere. I can't remember where. But there was a meta study where they looked at all of these different studies in China that they had done on Fa Qi, which is the ability to actually take these subtle substances and eject them out of your body and into someone else's body. So this is a very common thing in Neigong and Qigong. It's not like an extraordinary Jedi power thing. Like, you train really hard and you spend a lot of time building these substances up, and you learn how to send them out of the body by getting rid of the blockages through your body, and you send them out. And there's nothing mystical about it. It's like a technical set of skills. In any case, they've studied people that are quite competent in this, and what they've found is really interesting. Whatever is coming out of your body when you do qigong and neigong is not accounted for in our current understanding of the standard model of physics. I don't know that they've tested for absolutely everything that it could be, but all of the ones that people say that qi is not what it is. It's not electromagnetic energy, it's not bioelectric this and that. It's not a bunch of electrons. That's not what's going on there. So they've done studies on this, and they found that, okay, when somebody does eject these substances from their palm, for example, that there's changes in their body that come along with them moving this stuff around. So something, according to their nervous system and their body, something really dramatic is happening, and we can measure that. But whatever's actually happening In terms of these substances moving around, we can't measure it. We don't know what it is. Likewise, in the other person's body, they can record changes happening because of this substance that's being ejected into that person's body, chi. Uh, but once again, they can't detect anything that's passing from one person to the other. But they've done enough experimentation at this point in time, I think, in my opinion, to determine that this isn't just like a placebo thing or a hypnosis thing, right? Like they've done enough controlled studies on this for a long enough period of time to know that there's a real effect happening in the practitioner's body and a real effect happening in the person who's having this done to them. And mainly it's used for medical purposes. I've had one of my teachers demonstrate those skills at a high level to me personally in such a way that I'm fully convinced it's not simply a psychological phenomenon, that these are actual substances. These are some type of substance. So these substances, chi, different types of chi, because there are dozens of different kinds, you can actually feel in the body, you feel it with tactile sensation. So part of the reason I train people in body scanning is eventually if you want to move into qigong, neigong, certain types of tantric practice, you need to have really good physical awareness of your body. That's that's a doorway to be able to do those practices at a high level. If we're using the Chinese model that is held in common between the Taoists and I think also the Shaolin monastery, basically you would start with the physical layer because it's the easiest layer to deal with, and then you work with the chi layer, which is much more difficult and subtle to deal with, and then finally, once you have some experience working with chi, which also correlates with emotions and a whole bunch of other things, so it's changing your mind as you're working with these subtle substances, then you work with shun. So shun is an interesting concept. It's much, much, much more like the Indian Tantra's idea of what consciousness is. Because shun is both consciousness and very subtle substances associated with subtle types of consciousness, right? So it's like similar to chi, but much more subtle and associated just with consciousness instead of sort of a bridge between consciousness and physical stuff. Because you have chi in your that is like liver chi, right? And you have chi in the heart that is heart chi associated with your physical unit, according to these systems. Likewise, you have in just sort of pure consciousness, consciousness of itself has subtle substances associated with it that are not, strictly speaking, bodily bodily chi. So, likewise, if you study the tantric systems, there are similar kinds of layers that are described. If you're looking at it from a Buddhist standpoint, there are similar layers to your physical unit being described: the body, the subtle body, and subtle consciousness, and the substances associated with each. And the training in these in on the Buddhist side is also very explicit about dealing with each of the layers of your being as you're going through the training process. And then likewise on the Shaolin side, as far as I can tell, coming through the 18 Lohan Palm practice that again linked down below, you're working with each layer and gaining competence in each layer and pointing each layer in the direction of your ultimate realization. Okay, so in addition to having those sorts of substances inside the body, there's also substances like this associated with the natural environment. And so different, there are another, again, in these systems on the Chinese side, there are all of these practices that have to do with grabbing onto things that are in the environment and pulling them inside and then using them for stuff. So, yeah, if if you already have enough awareness of the unit to be aware of those substances and you already have a container to put them in because you don't have a container naturally, you have to build a container or multiple containers inside the body. And those containers have to be stable enough and have no leaks so that you can put stuff inside and then keep it there without it flying away. So that by itself is a years long process. It takes time. If you train in something like 18 Lohan Palm, you build up those skills over time as part of the system of working with the physical body, working with the breath, blah, blah, blah. So it builds up progressively. Then, yeah, if you're doing certain kinds of practice where it's relevant to be aware of external types of subtle substance, then yeah, then you become aware of those things, and you become more and more aware of them, then you're more aware of them all the time, or some of the time, right? So, in brief, in terms of your everyday standing practice, it's probably not so relevant unless you're doing specific practices while standing. In addition to doing body scanning, maybe you're doing practices for nourishing life, or you're doing practices for building the lower basin, building a container to put stuff in the lower field, or you're doing half a dozen other things that have to do with qigong or neigong practice or tantric practice, right? So in terms of your everyday practice of body scanning or the Neigong, the Neigong of just releasing muscular tension, et cetera, it doesn't have all that much to do with chi and so forth. It will naturally make the system ready to do those practices if you do a fair amount of them, but it's not, let's say, sort of directly doing that. It's doing that as a how do I put this? A side effect is not quite strong enough. It's that is part of the purpose of these things. Full disclosure, part of the reason I teach standing practice the way that I do is to prepare your system to do those other kinds of practices. If you do a fair amount of my standing practice, it will start to prepare your system to do those other kinds of energetic based practices. Right? So I've baked a lot into the five foundations without, I don't have to explain all this to people. Their head would explode. It's way too much information and half of it sounds really weird. But if you do these practices, your system will change. For example, some of you have noticed that your feet feel like they're on fire after like 5 minutes of standing. That's really weird, right? It's really weird that you would have this dramatic physical change after just standing for 5 minutes. You stand for longer than 5 minutes, probably quite often, and that doesn't happen. But if you are releasing everything down to the feet, along with the awareness and the release of physical substance, ordinary physical substance comes subtle physical substance, which is then pooling in the feet, opening the feet, forcefully opening the channels in the feet, and it feels like they're on fire. Or it feels like there's electricity building up in the legs. So this is why I say when you feel those sensations, don't shake them out of your feet and legs. Keep it as it is and just do a little bit of walking until it feels more normal. In any case, yeah. So this is actually how these things are related, not by sort of trying to jump to the further along down the road. If you just do the practices in a logical order, working with the body mainly, and then working with the body and the breath, and then working with body, breath, and chi, and then working with body, breath, chi, and consciousness, and then working with consciousness and shun, then this flowchart moves in a pretty logical way from really coarse and obvious to not very obvious at all. And from what I can tell on the Buddhist side, whether you're talking about the sort of Shaolini, Taoist kind of approach coming through China, or you're talking about the Buddhist tantras, very similar. Especially when you're talking about what do they really agree on as the fundamental kinds of practices that are the most profound and most important. Basically, they have both have something similar to Neidan practice, where you're putting stuff in the lower basin and so on and so forth. So, you know, yeah, all of these things are related. Yes, there's potentially energy in the environment and there's subtle substances in the environment. Yes, you can do things with those, blah, blah, blah. Should you do all that right now? Probably not. You know, probably for now, work on the fundamentals so that you gain more and more and more skill and you're increasingly able to actually uh, have control and competence and awareness of the most coarse layer, and then add more and more and more layers on until you can feel your heart, you can feel your lungs, you can feel your kidneys, you can feel your liver, you can feel your spleen. You can feel where not maybe not all of your bones, but you can feel where quite a few of your bones are by just putting your mind there. And at that point, you probably have enough awareness now because you have the ability to feel where your liver is to feel are there substances there in the liver that are different than the substances I feel in the spleen and the heart and the lungs, inside my skull, in the lower field, in the perineum, in the chest cavity, right? You start to be able to investigate these things first person instead of just having an opinion about it. You can actually look and go, well, is it like that or isn't it? That comes from the Jing layer, the body layer. Get really, really, really aware of what the physical unit actually is. And that, it just takes time. Okay. Let's see. I once came across a Buddhist online who claimed that he didn't believe the Buddha ever taught rebirth. Couldn't help but laugh. Yeah, there's a lot of people like that. It's kind of weird because if you read the suttas, the sutras, the Vinaya, of course, the Jatakas, etc., 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 it's hard to find. Like you'd have to throw literally Abhidharma. You'd have to throw away. I'm not exaggerating. Probably somewhere between half and three quarters of the entire Buddhist canon to think that the Buddha didn't teach rebirth and karma and this sort of thing. Realms of rebirth, karma, you know, and as you said, the Four Noble Truths, baked into the Four Noble Truths is karma and rebirth, the causes of suffering, and the freedom from suffering, which includes old age, sickness, and death. The Buddha is teaching you how to overcome death, right? If to overcome death, all you needed to do was die because that was the end of everything, the Buddha would have, the path would be really easy, just and you'd be done, right? Yeah, but unfortunately, death is not the end, according to the great yogis. So there's no escape hatch. We're all here together. Welcome to the party you can never leave. You know, you're invited. This is the situation we find ourselves in. So, yeah, in terms of the classics in Buddhism, there is absolutely no question that the Buddha taught karma, rebirth, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, I don't know of any scholar that thinks this besides a couple of weirdos. I mean, the entire field of Buddhist studies agrees. Secular scholars and religious scholars of Buddhism agree. This is what the Buddha taught. So, I mean, people are welcome to think whatever they want, but it's just not possible. We find the Buddha's teachings in the Pali. We find it in Gandharan. We find it in the ancient Chinese, the Agamas. The Agamas find their way into Japan, Korea, I think also Vietnam, maybe one or two other places. And then the Sanskrit canon is the Indian canon, right? Which in addition which then has a huge amount of material that also gets exported to China as part of the Agamas and gets exported to Tibet, Mongolia, Nepal, a number of other places. All of those canons spread out over an extremely wide area agree. The Buddha taught karma, rebirth, realms of rebirth, all of the basics they agree on. So it's just not possible historically to imagine, unless in pre written history people changed everything the Buddha said. But then imagine what that would mean in terms of, like, it's not actually an argument, if you understand what I mean, or where you're saying, well, the Buddha didn't teach that. Well, why do you think that? Because we don't know what he taught before we had it all written down. Okay. So how do you know he didn't teach that? What is your evidence for that? What's your positive evidence for this? because as the Buddha's teachings got written down, having already spread out, you know, into China, into various parts of India, into Gandhara, which is Greek and sort of Indian stuff mixed together. We find the same teaching all over the place. If it was something else, if the teaching was something else, it wouldn't look like that. The teachings would be all sort of frenetic, right? Where everybody's like, "Oh, well, we're just going to write down what we want." Okay. Anyways, data says when the inner light is witnessed and the chi converges with the light, it becomes shun. Uh, no. So So in terms of the general Nadon process, you make yourself aware enough of the body that your awareness becomes subtle enough that if this is chi, right, your awareness of the body is sort of building up like this until it bumps into chi, which is already there. And then once you have awareness of this, because your awareness is now brushing up against it, because your tactile awareness is so powerful, now you can start doing stuff with this. And there is Chun already here. And as your awareness of Qi builds up, it eventually bumps into Shen, which is subtler but similar to Qi. And once it bumps into Shen, then you can start doing stuff with Shen because your awareness is subtle enough to touch this awareness. In terms of having experiences of light and so forth, those aren't too difficult to generate. Um, I mean, even people that don't have that much experience, if you give them the right techniques, they can do that fairly quickly. That has more to do with where you're focusing your attention, at least in the way that I've been trained. Uh, yeah. Okay. Let's see. Yeah, it's possible that all of these substances that you can feel with the tactile sense could be extremely subtle types of physical substance. This is why I prefer the term subtle physical substance, because it could be that it's made up of very subtle types of physical stuff that is ordinary physical stuff. We haven't done enough research to rule that out. Although the research we have done indicates that whatever it is doesn't seem to operate on the same physical principles as ordinary physical stuff. Let me give you an example. When practitioners in Tukdam pass away, they take the energy from the bottom and the top of the body and they mix them together in the heart chakra. And you create an indestructible drop, they say, in the heart. And you enter this drop with the subtlest winds that you might call shun from a Nadon perspective. And you enter this drop and you hang out in there, realizing the subtlest aspect of your consciousness at the time of death. And if you do that, if you don't leave the body, if you stay in there with some of these subtle substances, which are part of what make you alive, right? The oldest translation, some of the older translations of prana, for example, besides breath, they mean life, vitality, the stuff that makes you alive. Likewise, these subtle substances that are part of what make you alive, when a person is literally clinically dead, the brain has stopped functioning, there's no heartbeat, there's no breathing for days, sometimes up to 45 days in the heat of the Indian summer with bugs crawling all over them, right? Yeah. I mean, I don't mean literally, but I mean that the windows are open and so forth. If this was an ordinary dead body, it would be absolutely horrific within a period of like 10 days, less, especially in those conditions. So they hold their mind in the subtle drop in the heart, and they realize the subtlest nature of mind while before the one that occurs at the time of death, right? So when they are still abiding there in the body, and you place your hand over that area, it's a bit like going somewhere and having someone do qigong on you, where you feel electricity and heat where they're pressing the the chi into the body, right? So you put the hand over the center of the body, and because they've pooled all these winds there, you put your hand over it and you go, "Ooh, wow, that's warm." There in the middle of their body. But they've now done scans where they look at the person's body with an infrared, and there's no heat there. There's no obvious heat there, at least. Their body is the same sort of temperature as the room. So there are a number of indications that whatever these substances are aren't operating on the same principles as ordinary physical matter. Does that mean that they aren't? Not necessarily. I mean, there's still stuff even according to the standard model, we don't know everything about the physical universe. I mean, if you talk to a physicist who's aware of all of these ideas in modern physics like dark energy, dark matter, etc. There's just a huge amount of stuff making up the universe that we don't know what it is, but it has mass. And other than that, it doesn't seem to do the same stuff as ordinary matter. It does really weird stuff. So, yeah, I mean, is it possible that it's these kinds of substances? Yeah, yeah. But everything we've tested for, we don't know what it is at this time. Now, could it also be that it isn't those things? I think the answer could also be yes. It could be that these substances aren't those. They don't fit into the the physical universe as we understand it in terms of particles and so forth. That they're made up of a subtler type of physical substance that isn't like that. And I think that would be more consistent actually with the descriptions that you find in the classical sources for these kinds of things. For what it's worth. Anyways, probably at this stage of most people's practice is not so these things are not so important. Most of the qigong, by the way, qigong, the skill of working with vital forces, right? Qi, vital forces, gong, skill or power. The skill and power of working with vital forces, that term qigong is a totally modern term. If you go back, I think even 70 years or something, that term doesn't exist. So this is a modern idea, qigong. However, there are huge numbers of systems like 18 Lohanpom, like 18 Lohanpom, like the Tibetan systems, etc., that have mm, a whole bunch of different exercises related to making the body work better, Jing, and increasing your awareness of the physical body and making the body work better both in general and for your seed practice. And then working with the vital forces aspect of your being, which includes these complex relationships, blood, breath, blah, 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 right? A whole grab bag of different things. And then also you have Neigong, internal alchemy, and this is definitely now primarily working with subtle physical substance that is not, at least as far as we can tell, is not made up of ordinary physical matter, as best we can tell at this time. Okay, let's see. Kai says maybe it's because of my cultural background, but when I heard there are secular Buddhists who don't believe in rebirth, I found it really strange. When I first got started, I wanted to believe in rebirth, but I couldn't. I wanted to, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. It just sounded too weird. Sounded too out there. If you're not raised with it and so forth, it's really difficult. In any case, it took some time to sort it out, but uh, I've been over it a bunch of times now. I think the evidence is pretty good for rebirth at this stage in history. Right. In any case, my friends, I will call it to a close here. Thank you for attending. So good to see you. Hope to see you again soon. Try not to disappear before I do.